Last week, Arliss talked about the Psalms, and he talked about design patterns and how Psalms are structured and put together. He talked about how there's couplets and metaphors, comparison and contrast, and all of that good stuff. This week, we're going to talk about how design patterns are not just found in the Psalms, they're found throughout the Bible. And it's important because when you start to see these design patterns, you're going to begin to see how the Bible is woven together as one cohesive unit. Even though we got multiple authors, we got hundreds of years between the writings of the various books, we begin to see that this could only be produced if God's hand was on it. And this is supposed to inspire you to dive deeper into your faith and your relationship with Him. The problem is we don't often see the design patterns because most of us don't really study our Bibles. Most of us want a nice verse for a social media post, a coffee mug, t-shirt, something nice to cross-stitch for our walls. And we miss the best parts of what God's doing when we do that. And I know that a lot of you think, oh, but studying my Bible is so hard. It's so boring. I guarantee you, if you are at that point, then your problem is you aren't pressing in deep enough. The moment it starts to get boring, it means you need to push harder because there's something better on the other side. And because I'm a teacher and I've always been a teacher, I'm going to give you some study notes on how to do this better. The first step is you've got to read and reread. There's no shortcut there. There's absolutely no shortcut. See, to see the design patterns, you've got to be familiar. And to be familiar, you've got to use repetition. Also, when you read it in 2 or 3 different translations. Translation is not code breaking. There's not one Hebrew word that equals one English word. You've got to know the design. You've got to know how it's put together and what the tone and the nuance is. But then even the translator is going to come with their baggage and their background and their perspective, and they're going to bring out something different. And in this day and age, you can read 20 different translations. They're all on your phone. It's amazing. This used to be cost prohibitive. Not now. How blessed are we? Listen to 2 or 3 different teachers about the same topic. Again, it's on your phone. We live in a day and age when there is absolutely no excuse to be ignorant of our Bible. Amen. If you're ignorant of your Bible, it's on you. And some of y'all are saying, well, you know, it's still really hard for me to read. Okay, I get that. Get a children's Bible. Read the children's Bible until you're familiar with the stories, then go back and read it in a regular Bible. They have comic book Bibles. If you get bored very easily, get a comic book Bible. Use the tools that God has given you. And I'm going to say something that might get me into a little bit of trouble with Arliss, so forgive me. If you're relying on Arliss to spoon feed you your Bible every Sunday, you're wrong. It's not that he's not good at it, but you need to be feeding yourselves. A lot of people complain that, oh, I'm not growing, I'm not hearing from God, and it's because y'all guys aren't putting in the time. And I can say that because I am a teacher and you can't fire me. So what I want you guys to know is this is here, it's available. You need to meditate on the text. You need to see the design patterns, and you begin by looking at it over and over again, and God will begin to pull out bits and pieces to show you where He's going with this. As you begin to know the text, you can begin to ask questions. Why does it say this? Why does it say it this way? What's missing? The only way you can ask what's missing from a text is if you know what you should expect there. So, now that I've laid out some of my foundations for where I'm going with this, we're going to talk about a very interesting design pattern. One of my favorites is called sequels. If you go to seminary, they're going to give you a really fancy word called intertextuality or intertextual studies. It's just design patterns. It's the study of how one text plays off of the other. And the best way to show you that is to do examples. So there's 2 types of sequels. One is a sequential sequel. This is when the writer takes a theme, key phrases, key words, and other writers pick them up and build on it, and they keep repeating it. And as they repeat it, they're affirming and confirming that this is absolutely the message you need to hear. The second one is subversive sequels. And we're going to start with the subversive because to me they're kind of fun. And subversive sequels are what happens whenever we start looking at how the writers might take a story and then tweak it. How do they change the meaning just by changing the perspective? So our primary text is going to be in Genesis 11, but we're actually going to start in Genesis 10. And I only picked up the last part of this chapter because I just want you to get a flavor of what's going on here. I want you to see the design pattern. We're going to start out with Genesis 11:21. This is the last part. Now, this entire chapter is just the generations of Noah. And I know y'all guys are thinking, names? This is going to be the most boring part of all the Bible. We used to call these the begats. You know, so-and-so begat so-and-so who begat so-and-so, if you learned it in the good King James Version. But to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, the children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Apakshad, Lud, Aram, the sons of Aram. Y'all guys getting the picture? This is a lot of names. There are a lot of hard names. We tend to skip this. Why do we have so many names here? That's a good question to ask. So let's get into our main text. This is Genesis 11, and we are going to, I'm just going to read the entire story. Most of you probably learned this story in Vacation Bible School or Sunday School. It says, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had a brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city, make a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. So the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people with all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down. And they are confused their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. And the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left building the city. Okay, so I don't want to break the flow. We aren't going to stop and look at this too much right now. We're going to keep reading in Genesis 11. We're going to continue on to our next verse. And I'm getting ahead of myself. Therefore the name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over all the face of the earth. And now we're going to continue. It says, these are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived and fathered Arpachshad 500 years, and they had sons and daughters. Does this sound familiar? I know this sounds really boring, right? Does this sound familiar? Where did we hear these names before? Okay, so Genesis 11, whenever we burst in here, what's going on here? Why do we have this section where we got two lists of names and then this story? That's weird. What's the writer doing? We shouldn't have these generations, these genealogies broken up by a story. Guys, if something's weird in the Bible, it's important. For some of you, that's the only message you need to hear this morning. If you're weird, you're important, okay? So, but the thing is, when we see stuff like this, we need to stop and think about it. We're going to go back through this, but I want to show you how different translations work. Look at Genesis 11, but this time we're going to use Robert Alter's translation. If you do any serious Old Testament study, I highly recommend that you get a hold of Robert Alter's translations. He is a Jew, and he has a degree in English literature, so he approaches this a little different. And he's very consistent in how he translates. So we're going to look at how just a different translation can change how we understand what's going on here. And please, as we read through this, hold on to the things I have in bold. And all the earth, kol ha'eretz, all the earth was one language, one set of words. And it happened as they journeyed from the east that they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, come, let us make bricks and burn them hard. Literally in the Hebrew, this is brick for bricks and a burning for a burning. Anytime you double something in ancient languages, you're intensifying it. So not just let's make some bricks, let's make a lot of bricks. Let's burn them really hard. And the bricks served them for stone, and bitumen served them for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build a city with a tower in the tops of the heavens, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered over all the earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the human creatures had built. And the Lord said, as one people with one language for all, this is what they have begun to do. Now nothing they plot will elude them. Come, let us go down and baffle their language, so that they will not understand each other's language. The Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it is called Babel, for there the Lord made the language of all the earth Babel, and from there the Lord scattered them from over all the earth. Something the ESV, the original one we did, the translators here tried to make it more interesting. They gave you a lot of different words. Alter says, no, we're going to stick more with the original languages, because the writer is intentionally being repetitious here. The repetition is part of the story. He even goes so far to use words that sound and look the same in Hebrew. And I'm going to give you a little example of that now. And you see we have these words, name, that's Shem, which, by the way, when we read about Shem, the generations of Shem, Noah's son, his name is Name. I guess they ran out of things to call him. They're going to settle there, and they're going to talk about the heavens. So you have this repetition of Shem, Sham, Shemaim. It's like some fifth grader took over, or Dr. Seuss maybe. They're wanting you to see that this is not supposed to be an exciting story. It's supposed to be monotonous. We have all the earth, Ho-Hal Eretz, it's 5 times. We have the language 5 times. The number one is used 4 times. We have some variation of to build 3 times, scatter 3 times. Name and there are a combination of 7 times. Now there's some things going on here that you might miss, and what we want to look at is what's happening here. Why is this important? It's more than just about how we get languages. It's way more important than that. You see, when they were building this tower, thanks to something called archaeology, we know that they were building a ziggurat. Now, a ziggurat is a step-sided pyramid, and these step-sided pyramids were used for ancient cultic rituals. I can't even begin to tell you what these rituals looked like because I would get kicked out of here. But the whole point of it was that the king/priest would go up to the top of this pyramid, and he would have a ritual, and the god would come down, whatever god they were serving, would come down, inhabit their body, and the child that was conceived there would then be part god and part human, and he was allowed to rule that nation. God didn't think this was a great way for him to communicate with us. This is a full-on rejection of that system of worship. Also, why do they think that they have any business being able to summon God there? That word there is important, because if you read Genesis, one of the things you're going to find out, God's never there. He absolutely is never going to show up there. He's always going to call you out to go to the place. He's going to tell Abraham, let's go to the place I'm going to show you. He's going to tell David, go to the place that I'm going to show you to build the temple. You're always called out. And there's a whole lesson right there. If you aren't hearing from God, are you trying to summon him there? Maybe you aren't in the place he would want you. But I'll save the real preaching for Arliss. So, in Genesis, cities are never a positive thing. This is another design pattern. The first city was created by the first murderer. And the city's mentioned more often than the tower, by the way. We call it Tower of Babel, but the city's really the problem. Whenever we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, we know that there's a problem there. I don't even have to elaborate. Shechem, horrible things happen in Shechem. See, the issue with Babel is not so much that they're trying to find God, because that always bugged me as a kid. Why is it that God's upset with them for trying to get close to him? It was the way and the means through which they were trying to get close to him. But now we got another question we got to answer. I asked it before. Why is this story bracketed by names? If you notice, there's no name in this story. Not a single individual is named in all of the Tower of Babel. And the writer is calling this out by putting it in the midst of that list. He's highlighting it, giant neon sign, if you actually know the story. Now, to really drive home the point, you kind of need to read it in conjunction with another story that's linked to it. And you probably didn't realize these two stories were connected. I know I didn't. I actually had to look at a book by the name of a lady named Judy Klitzner, who wrote a book called Subversive Sequels. And when I read this, I was so excited. But she connects Exodus 1 and Genesis 11. So we're going to go through this real quick. It says, and these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. And then we start to get this list of names. You can see all of them right there. I'm not going to read through all of it, which, by the way, the book of Exodus in Hebrew is known as Shemot, which is the book of names. So we are introduced with the book of names. This is common in ancient literature. We have a repeat of Genesis 46. This is verbatim. And then we go into our story. So we're going to skip down to Genesis 15 through 17. It says, a new king arose over Egypt who knew not Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the sons of Israel is more numerous and vaster than we. Come, let us be shrewd with them, lest they multiply and then war should occur, and they will actually join with our enemies and fight against us and go up from the land. And they set over them forced labor foremen so as to abuse them with burdens. And they built, see the emphasis there, cities, and they Pithom and Ramses, and as they abused them, so did they multiply, so did they spread. That word spread there, that's the same word as scatter in Genesis 11. And they came to loathe the Israelites, and the Egyptians put Israelites to work at crushing labor, and they made their lives bitter, working them hard with mortar and bricks. Where did we see mortar and bricks? It's in Genesis 11. There's only 3 places in the Bible where we find mortar or bricks connected. Genesis 11 is the first one. This is the second one. The third one's in Nahum, in case you want to look it up. And so all the crushing work that they performed. Again, we have a short little bit of a name. He didn't know Joseph. That's the only individual name in that part. Pharaoh's a title. Sons of Israel is speaking of masses. But no individual gets called out just yet. As we keep reading, it says, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, this is the midwives that served the Hebrew women. I've got a paper on that in the Priscilla papers if you want to look that up, that argues that these are Egyptian midwives serving the Hebrew women, one who was named Shiphrah and one who was named Puah. When you deliver the Hebrew women and look at them upon their birth stool, if it is a boy, you shall put him to death. If it's a girl, she may live. And the midwives feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had spoke to them. And they let the children live. Finally, we have a name. These are the only 2 people within this account at this point in time who were named until we get to Exodus 2:10. And that's when Moses is named by Pharaoh's daughter. Not a single man is named. The women who are talked about, and there's a lot of women because Pharaoh's busy worried about the boys rising up, but it's actually the women. The individuals are being erased in Egypt. That's how Pharaoh gets them to be hated, because they aren't individuals that people can relate to. They're just a mass. They're slaves to a system, building monuments to a system that doesn't care about the person. If you don't have a name in the Bible, you don't have an identity. You don't have a purpose. You don't have a legacy. You've got to have a name. This is why God is in the business of changing names in the Bible. We've got Abraham, Sarah, Jacob, who becomes Israel. The history of the Bible hinges on the individual. And it's always the individual who's called out. Now, these midwives get named. Why? Because they fear the Lord. This is where they root their identity. This is where they gain their purpose from. It's from the Lord, so they're able to step outside of the system. They're able to defy the system. They're able to set in motion a chain of events that brings an entire empire to its knees. I think we forget how big of a deal this is. You see, Pharaoh was believed to be the embodiment of their God. These women in a society where women were discounted and demeaned as something slightly less than human were standing up against a god. And they found the ability to do it because they feared God. So in Exodus 1:21, and I don't have a slide for this, it says that God puts them in families because they feared the Lord. This is good news. None of us are condemned to be a part of a system that wants to grind away at the individual. A lot of y'all feel like I'm just slaving away, I'm wasting my time, I'm working, and nobody appreciates it. God's telling you how to break the system. He's telling you how to step apart. It's found in the fear of the Lord. So, all of us have the ability to grab hold of our identity. And when you put these stories together, that's what we begin to see. But you kind of miss it with just the Tower of Babel because we think, oh, that's how we got languages. So, we're going to move on to our next part of this. That was a subversive sequel. That's how the Bible can undermine a shallow reading and deny people from putting simple labels on things. We're going to look at sequential sequels, and this is my absolute favorite. We're going to go through 4 stories. We're not going to read them because there's too much there. And we're going to put the, I believe I've got the slide for the text, but we're going to start with Elisha and Elijah. This is 2 Kings 2 is where we are starting out. Elijah is the primary prophet of Israel. He's known for facing off with Baal's prophets. He calls down fire from heaven. He orders their execution. He squares off with the evil queen Jezebel. He gets a little grumpy. God takes him to a cave for a snack and a nap. He gets better. He gets fed by ravens. But he also has a protege named Elisha. Elisha has some interesting stories of his own, which we're not going to take time to go into because they really don't matter for the purposes of today's lessons. But the big point that I want to make with them is whenever Elijah gets ready to die, one of the things that happens, they're making their way to the place where God has called Elijah, the Macomb. As they're making their way there, Elisha has the sheer audacity to say, I want double of what you've got. And Elijah tells Elisha, well, if you see me taken up in the chariot, you can have it. So as they're making their way to the spot where God's called them, they get to the Jordan River. They've got to get across. Elijah takes off his cloak. He smacks the water parts. They go across on dry land. Chariot comes down, picks up Elijah. The cloak falls to the ground. Elisha retrieves it. He picks it back up. He goes back to the Jordan. He smacks the water parts again. And Elisha will go on to do roughly double the number of miracles that Elijah does. God keeps his promises. Okay, so there's our pattern. 2 men parting water. We're going to look for this in other places. Does anybody know the next parting water? If we're working backwards? Joshua. Get the J right. And so the children of Israel, they've been in the desert. Who's been the primary prophet? Moses. Moses has been our primary prophet, and he has led them through the wilderness. There's been manna, there's been quail, there have been battles against the giant King Og. Moses has really proven that he is God's servant, and God is with him. But it's time for him to go. God has called him to a Macomb. They're going to go to a mountain. He's going to get to look over into Canaan, but he's not going to get to enter in. And before he leaves, God says, you're going to need to give the people a new leader. And so he appoints Joshua. Joshua gets ready to go into Canaan. Moses has died. And he tells the priest, get the Ark of the Covenant, put it on your shoulders, head to the Jordan. But we got a river here. We got to get across. We're told that whenever the priests put their feet into the water's piled up. God just stops them. They get across, and Joshua leads a full-on assault against the giant clans who are living among the Canaanites. That's a really fun topic that I would love to go into sometime because this is so important. He is facing giants. Giants were spiritual creatures in the Old Testament. They're not just abnormally large humans. And he's going to be the one who steps in to reclaim the inheritance that God gave Abraham. Now, when God parted the waters in Joshua 3:7, he tells us why he does this. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will exalt you in the sight of Israel, that you may know that I am with you as I was with Moses." Sorry, I botched that, but y'all get the point. It's to exalt Joshua. Okay, hang on to this. This is important. So we're going to back up one more time to another set of parting waters. Everybody knows this. This is the Red Sea. The children of Israel have been oppressed by Pharaoh. He's taken away their identity, their name, their purpose. He's tried to. But one of them gets called out, gets sent out. God uses circumstances to get Moses to Macomb, that place where the burning bush is, so God can speak to him. By the way, y'all guys realize God never talks to anyone when they're in Egypt? Not a single word. He talks to Jacob when they're on the way down to go retrieve Joseph. But it's not until they get out of Egypt, when Moses leaves Egypt, that he's willing to speak again. You see, you got to be in the place where God wants you. So we all know what Moses is going to go tell Pharaoh. He's going to say, "Let my people go." Pharaoh is not going to have it. And I love how God equips Moses to do this. Remember, I said Pharaoh was a god. So in Exodus 7:1, it says, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet.'" It takes a god to defeat a god. A lot of people never read this verse. They never paid attention to it. It's a little too weird. But if it's weird, it's important to remember that. By the way, I'm stealing it from Dr. Michael Heiser, so I don't want to act like that's me. So we are told on the Passover night that this is exactly what's going on. We got God squaring off. Exodus 12:12 says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment." Did y'all realize that's what the plagues are for? God is executing judgment on the gods of Egypt. We need God to execute judgment on some of the gods of our land and our lives. But again, that might get a little too close to preaching. So, when God executes judgment in the Passover, they flee. We know the story. Pharaoh's armies are hot on the heels. The Red Sea's in front of them. They're freaking out. Moses holds up the staff. The waters part. They go through. And what I love about this is the way of liberation for God's chosen is the means of destruction for the evil. That's important. Hang on to that. So we got one more story about, Old Testament story, about parting water. Does anybody know the fourth story? Genesis 1. Genesis 1. And I guess I did not include the verses for this, but we know that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and what's he do? He divides the light from the darkness, right? He divides the upper waters from the lower waters, right? He separates and gathers the waters into one place so that they can be separated from the dry land, right? 3 acts of division, not one. And then, so we've got this word here, Shemaim and Hashemaim. Shemaim and Maim. Heavens in Hebrew is the same word as water. There's one letter difference. Shemaim and Maim. They're the same. We need to keep in mind that the upper waters are the heavens, because this is going to be important when we get to our next story. But something happens here. God gives, and we're going to go back to Genesis. Go back one slide for me. God says to them, Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. You notice what's happening here? Just like with Moses and Pharaoh, and Moses and Joshua, and Elijah and Elisha, we have this transfer of power and authority. God's giving power and authority to Adam after these great divisions of water. Okay, so why is this important? Why does the Old Testament 4 times give us the same pattern? It's because in Matthew 3, we have something happen. Then Jesus came from Galilee to Jordan to John to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you. Do you come to me? But Jesus answered, let it be so now, for thus is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he consented. And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were what? It says opened, but it's parted. It's the same idea. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, coming to rest on him. Now, a lot of times people will say things like, well, you know, the Jews at that point in time didn't realize that Jesus was God. Anybody who saw this, any observant, faithful Jew who saw this, knew exactly who Jesus was. There was no mistaking it. God had set the pattern. God had said, this is what happens when I show up to deliver power and authority to my anointed and my chosen person. The waters part. And this time, it's not just the waters on the land, it's the waters in the sky, because Jesus is so much greater than anyone who's come before. It's right there. It's so obvious, but you've got to see the pattern. And you see the pattern through meditation. You see the pattern through slow, careful reading. That familiarity that comes by repetition. And if you don't believe these stories are connected and you think, well, that's kind of a weak option, how about this? In Matthew 11:13 and 14, notice what Jesus says. For all the prophets of the law were prophesied until John, and if you're willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. Amen. That's a really big one. Or how about the fact that Jesus and Joshua have the exact same name in Hebrew? Y'all realize that? See, Joshua fought giants. Jesus is going to destroy demons. How about Deuteronomy 18 and 19? I will raise up for them a prophet like you. God's talking to Moses here. From among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I commanded him. And whoever will not listen to my words, he shall speak in my name, and I myself will require it of him. The prophet like unto Moses, you study very long at all, the first thing you're going to discover is that's Jesus. There's your connection there. Number 4, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:45, thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, and the last man became a life-giving spirit. Jesus is the second Adam. You see, all of these stories are pointing us to this realization that Jesus is the anointed one of God who's come to save this earth. Adam surrendered his authority to Satan. We know that Jesus, man, he held on to it. He reclaimed it. Not just for himself, but for all of those who believe in him. Moses liberated a nation. Jesus is going to liberate all who believe in him. The entire world has been waiting for him. Joshua fought giants. Jesus defeats demons, powers, principalities, authorities, and high places. Elisha raised 2 from the dead. All of us who believe are going to be raised again. The pattern set so you know what to expect. You can't see the pattern if you're not in the Word. How about it takes a God to defeat a God? Who's the God of this world? Oh, Jesus says at that point in time it was Satan was the God of the world. Now he's coming back and he's going to be God of this world. It takes a God to defeat a God. God parted the waters to glorify Joshua. Why do you think he parted the waters at the baptism. This is really good news, but it doesn't stop there. There's one more time that we're told the waters are going to part. You might have missed it because we've forgotten that the heavens are the upper waters. So Revelation 6:13, he opened the sixth seal, and I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished and rolled up like a scroll. And every mountain and island was removed from its place. And then the kings of the earth and the great ones, the generals, the kings of the earth. Does that sound like Pharaoh to you? The great ones, the giants, the generals, the rich, the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains, fall on us, hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come. Who can stand? You know, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, left behind, the late great planet Earth, a lot of fear-mongering. I know a lot of people who are terrified of the idea of God showing up again. But you see, I think the pattern was put in place so that we can have comfort, so that we can walk into that moment with confidence to see what God's going to do. We know what's going to happen next. Revelation 11:15, it says, after the trumpets are blown, there's 7 of them, the 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there was a loud voice in the heavens saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. There is beauty in the patterns because they sustain us, they enlighten us, they begin to take this beyond just a simple child's tale. When you start to see the patterns, the Bible's no longer going to be flannel graphs. It's not going to be veggie tales. It's going to be something impactful, something that is going to change the way you feel and look at God. Feel about and look at God. When the heavens part, we don't have to be afraid. That's good news. So, we put all this together. We're not part of his nameless system. We're not part of some kind of empire that wishes to grind us down to nothing if we're willing to step into the identity and the legacy that God has given us. We can see the patterns and we can find the strength to move forward because we can fear the Lord and still find comfort in him. And the patterns show us that the God of eternity past is going to be the God of the future.